Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
A blessing for Mother's Day. Bless all the moms, those who have carried us in their bodies and in their hearts and in their minds, and all those who have mothered us in some form or fashion.
The ones who answer our calls, no matter the time of day or absurd the request. Those who remind us that we are loved, 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 no matter what.
We thank them and honor them all. Those we can hug today, and those who are now gone, and those now distant from us.
And bless all those, too, for whom mothering is complicated, difficult, heartbreaking, or incomplete.
Do what only you can do, God. Bless and heal. restore, and rebuild all generations, forwards and backwards in time. Amen.
Now the darkness fades into new beginnings as we lift our eyes to the hope beyond. All creation waits with an expectation to declare the reign of the Lord our God. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one is overcome. And for every fear, there's an empty grave, for the risen one is overcome. Now the silence breaks in the name of Jesus, as the heavens cry, let the earth respond. All creation shouts with a voice of triumph to declare the reign of the Lord our God. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one is overcome. And for every fear, there's an empty grave, for the risen one is overcome. He shall reign forever, strongholds now surrender, for the Lord our God has overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus our defender, He is Lord and He has overcome. He shall reign forever, strongholds now surrender, for the Lord our God has overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus our defender, He is Lord and He has overcome. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one has overcome. And for every fear, there's an empty grave, for the risen one has overcome. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one has overcome. And for every fear, there's an empty grave, for the risen one has overcome.
Hey Crosspointe, happy Sunday. I've got a few announcements for you. We've got lots of meaningful ways that you can engage in all the good things that this community is up to. First, next Sunday, May 19th, after service, we're hosting our next community conversation. The topic of this particular conversation is an introduction to critical race theory. Now, we've all heard the buzz of controversy around the teaching of CRT. In order to engage this conversation thoughtfully, it's important for us to have a solid understanding of what CRT actually is. This session will be led by Crosspointe Community Pastor, Dr. Tirza Turner. Tirza's expertise and research makes her a trusted voice when it comes to our growing understanding of this topic. This workshop will focus on definitions, history, controversies around critical race theory, clarifying what CRT is and isn't. If you are interested in deepening your understanding of this important issue, you can go to the Crosspointe website and register at crosspointe.org/events/community conversations. This helps us to know how much pizza to order because we recognize that we're meeting during lunchtime. Now, this is an interesting time of year, particularly for those of you that are parents of college students. College students are wrapping up their exams, and many of them are home for the summer. Not all, but many of these college students grew up at Crosspointe. But figuring out how to plug into Crosspointe when they're only home for the summer can be a bit tricky. However, we have some fantastic volunteers that have organized a whole host of gatherings for our college-age students during the summer as an opportunity for them to gather with folks in our community that are in a similar stage of life. However, they will likely need you, their parents, to help make them aware of these gatherings. The first of these is next Sunday, May 19th at 6:30 p.m. We're hosting a game night for college students in our community, and it should be a great social opportunity for our young adults. You can find more information about this gathering and additional events on our website at crosspointe.org/youngadults. Now, if you're encouraging your college student to go, don't forget to tell them there's free food. Okay, each summer we get to gather together to hear some great storytelling at Story Night. You can mark your calendar for June 25th at Fortnight Brewery. However, the heart of this experience is the stories. Now, maybe you have a true personal story to share around the theme, which is imposters. Now, you might have a story of a time you realized that someone was not who they were representing themselves to be, or maybe your story connects to a product or experience that was described one way, but was revealed to be something else entirely. Or sometimes we might feel like we're the imposter when positioned to play a role that we don't feel qualified for at all. If you have a true story that you think fits the theme of imposters, we're inviting you to pitch the story by going to crosspointe.org/events and share your pitch in an abbreviated form of fewer than 250 words. You can tell us what happened and how it affected you, and then we'll pick 5 or 6 of those to be workshopped and then shared at Story Night in June. The deadline to submit pitches is June 4th. Also, we've announced in past weeks, but it's also worth sharing again, that next Saturday, May 18th, you have an opportunity to partner with others to help build a house with Habitat for Humanity of Wake County. We're excited to be participating in the Interfaith Build. This is a great opportunity to come together with others in the Crosspointe community and members of other faith communities to take tangible steps to help combat the affordable housing crisis. No construction experience is necessary, but volunteers must be at least 16 years old to participate. You can find more information at, you guessed it, crosspointe.org/Habitat for Humanity Build. This sure is a busy time of year, and you may be looking ahead and making plans for upcoming Memorial Day weekend. Crosspointe will not be holding in-person services on Sunday, May 26th. We do this for a variety of reasons. Now, not the least of those being that our children and student ministry environments require a significant number of volunteers, not only to make those spaces great places for our kids, but also to make sure that we're safe, to ensure that we have appropriate volunteer to child ratios. With so many folks out of town on Memorial Day weekend, we're left with a significant shortage of volunteers. Rather than stretching the volunteers and staff that are in town so thin on that Sunday morning, we decided that it's a healthier rhythm for our community to not meet in person on that Sunday. While we won't gather in person, we hope that you will still join us on YouTube for our online service. We are doing so many wonderful things together as a community. Remember that Crosspointe is sustained by you. If you'd like to fund all that Crosspointe is up to, we invite you to contribute financially. You can give through stocks, PayPal, mail-in checks, or debit cards by going to crosspointe.org/contribute. Or you can text crosspointenc to 77977 and it'll send a link to your phone and you can choose how you would like to contribute. Thanks, Crosspointe.
What are the things that we say when our dog comes to us when we call his name? We'll say, good boy, or he'll sit and resist eating the treat until we give him the go-ahead. Good dog. What are we inclined to yell at the dog the third time he pees on the hardwoods? That's a bad dog. We might yell that one. But when that dog goes to the door for that first time, wagging, asking with his little eyes to be taken out to pee, and that's a good dog right there. That dog's getting a treat. What do we call a dog that doesn't bite, not even playfully? It's a good dog. And then a dog we can't get to stop nipping and biting and chewing on the furniture, that's a bad dog. Like that's a might need to visit a South Dakota gravel pit. Bad dog. I'm kidding. No one in their right mind would ever do such a thing. I know that this is philosophical more than it is practical, but it seems clear that what we are declaring is a good dog is actually not a good dog. It's good at acting less and less like a dog at all. You know, a good dog in the fullness of its dogness, it's not actually a very good pet. We'd call it bad if it were being a good dog. But what we would mean is that the animal hadn't erased enough parts of its true self. It's refused to submit to our control. I have a dog. I get how this works. I don't want it to act like a dog. I generally want my dog to act like an obedient toddler. It doesn't take a rocket surgeon to connect the dots here. Many of us understand faith to be sort of like this, like self-erasure, to erase yourself, self-doubt, conforming who we actually are to an image more tolerable to our master. Or another way to think about it, we're supposed to remain in sort of this state of unending dependency, where we never really graduate into a self-possessed adulthood because, well, there's something wrong with us. We can't be trusted. So the most mature faith is seen as remaining the most dependent. It's the most self-erasing, the exact opposite of what we would want for our own children to grow up and think of themselves. Even this arrangement, where I'm teaching and then there's a whole bunch of other people who aren't teaching, this serves to reinforce the idea that you're not able to learn of God with your life, with your own experiences, with who you are primarily. God can only be taught to you because God is not something that we discover or can trust our own experience of primarily. God is primarily a correctly learned subject for maybe most of us. God is a class we take, but you can't really graduate from. That your own experience, you might be having one, but it has to be dragged before the authorities, the interpreters, to see, does it align or is it askew? Now the mistake to make here is understanding me or anybody else suggesting that what we should be thinking of is like this pendulum swing to a kind of self-sufficiency, where you pretend you don't need anybody. That's where the life is. Deny the reality of your inherent oneness with God and others, God's world. Attempt to live outside the streams of grace and peace. Be really special. Be a self-made whatever. Go do your own thing. That's a disease to try to live by. And a lot of people are trying it. And I would say that it's a real sickness. I'm not suggesting that. I want to talk about whether or not we believe God is more interested in us becoming anything but ourselves. Ugh. Or is God inviting us to live deeply, live the life, our lives the way we were made to live them? This is such a recurring conversation I have with people, especially when they have all these doubts. We talk about deconstruction. It feels like they're supposed to, I feel like I'm supposed to leave the faith, to leave the whole conversation in order to actually live. So I thought I'd put some thoughts forward today and maybe even some related thoughts next week. See if it clarifies, see if it maybe gets some weight off of our shoulders. So we're going to walk through a text that illuminates some things about this directly and indirectly. It's a very helpful story in the text, in the Bible. It's a particularly famous quote from the Gospel of John that Jesus says in the 10th chapter of John. John 10:10 reads, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Now, this isn't scientific, but in my experience, the vast majority of sermons that use this passage have Jesus referring to the devil when he says the thief. Oh, and I know that makes sense on its face. Like Jesus wants to bless, but the thief, the devil, wants to take blessing away. But I could argue that the devil gives things more than the devil takes things, you know? Like, here, have an apple. Or how about turn these stones to bread? Would you like a job as king of the world? Hey, here's a word you could call them. You won't regret it. I'm saying that I don't think there's much good reason to think Jesus is referring to the devil in this passage when he says the thief, especially when you read the context, and that's what we're going to do now. Because this whole scene starts a whole chapter earlier. Chapter 9 starts like this. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from his birth. And the disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It's a really stupid question. The disciples are asking if the man sinned. Is that why he was born blind? That doesn't make any sense. But then he's saying, is the child being punished? Or is the child being punished for something the parents did? Which is also silly until you realize a lot of us still believe a version of this to one degree or another. So Jesus answers them and says, it's not that this man sinned or his parents sinned. God doesn't blind babies out of some weird idea of justice, but that the works of God might be manifest in him. This guy didn't sin. It's not that his parents sinned, but that the works of God might be manifest in him. Now, before I read on, understand that there's a ton of debate over how to translate the Greek here. It sounds like Jesus is saying that it's not that this guy or his parents sinned. God made him blind so that later in life God could wow a crowd, amazing them so much that they might convert. And that would be a really difficult and potentially awful thing to have to accept about God. That our hardships or our children's hardships are a prop for God to use to convert people. But for some people, maybe that's an encouragement. Maybe it gives their hardship, their suffering meaning. I really don't know. I just want to point out here that in the Greek that this is translated from, there are no chapters, there are no verses, there are no commas, there are no periods, there's no capital and lowercase. So the very next sentence, which is connected to it, might help us get to the root of what's being said here. Jesus says, it's not that this man sinned or his parents sinned, but that the works of God might be made manifest in him. We must work the works of him who sent me. Or, there's no weird cause and effect thing happening here. This is an opportunity for the works of the one who sent me to be applied, though. While it is day, night comes when no one can work. It's been nighttime long enough. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. As he said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and anointed the man's eyes with the clay, saying to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which John translates from the Aramaic, that means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. And as the chapter goes on, you can imagine people start talking. Is this the blind guy that used to beg? No, it's his doppelganger. Then they ask him, how do you see now? The guy's like, I don't know. This guy named Jesus put spit mud in my eyes, and now I'm not blind anymore. Or where is he? I don't know. I'm a little overwhelmed about where everything is at the moment, now that I can see. And then John 9 goes on to show that religious leaders get involved and they start interrogating the man. They're asking him, the sinner we've heard about named Jesus, how did he do this? And why would he for somebody like you? And the guy tells the story again. Then they go to his parents to get their testimony, and they're like, yeah, that's our kid, but he's an adult. Can you just talk to him? They don't really want to be involved because the religious authorities have said, we're going to kick out anybody on the Team Jesus. We're going to kick them out of the synagogue, and we can't have that. Then one of the best exchanges in the New Testament happens, one of my favorites anyway. It says, for the second time, the religious authorities called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, give God praise. We know that this man is a sinner. And he answered, whether he's a sinner, I don't know. One thing I know, I was blind, and now I see. And they said, those would make great song lyrics. What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And the man answered them, I told you already, but you won't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become one of his disciples? And they reviled him, saying, you're one of his disciples. We are disciples of Moses, the guy that gives us the law, the rules that we have to make everybody live by. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, well, we don't know where he comes from. And the man answered, Why, this is a marvel. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, You were born in utter sin, and you're going to teach us? And they cast him out. There's a lot that happens there, but you catch that last part? Jesus said, look, no, stop blaming, trying to figure out who the sinner is here. Stop trying to figure out who to put down. It's not that the guy sinned or that he inherited sin from his sinful parents. The blindness wasn't a punishment. But the religious leaders, that's their go-to. When they can't get this lowlife to uphold their system, to defend their tradition, to speak in a way that defends their little box of God, they are the ones that say, you were born in sin. You can't teach us a thing. You're inherently bad. They are the ones that need people to believe this, to believe less about themselves, because that is what protects the formula and their position as keepers of the formulas. And so chapter 9 continues, it finishes with Jesus meeting this guy, and he meets him after he's been banished from the synagogue. So he just meets him out there in the world somewhere. That's an important visual. If you can allow your brain to paint that picture, if that's how your brain works, Jesus meets the reject outside the worship and religious center, just out there in the world somewhere. And sort of says, oh, sure, they have all the answers, but you can see, can't you? And then the last sentence of chapter 9 depicts Jesus speaking directly to the religious authorities. They know all the rules. They know the very will of God. Just ask them. And he tells them they're all blinder than that other man had ever been. Then we get to chapter 10, which remember, there's no chapter and verse then. This is just the next sentence originally. We added chapters and verses hundreds of years later. Truly, truly, I say to you, you faith police, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in some other way, that man is a thief and a robber. So this sheep metaphor is for anyone, it's about anyone trying to take people and build a congregation out of their lies and their ultimatums and their threats and their hierarchies and their shame and all that. People who sneak in and are trying to build a movement saying, no, I'm here on God's behalf. That man is a thief and a robber, but he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him, the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him out, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, because they don't know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they didn't understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I'm the door of the sheep. Now listen, the door isn't to keep the sheep out. It's not there to keep you out until you pray the sinner's prayer and renounce evolution and stop cussing. These doors and gates in this metaphor are for protection. They're against the thieves and the robbers that he's speaking to, the religious authorities, the status quo keepers. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, he says. But the sheep didn't heed them. They don't believe you. They're just scared to admit it. Deep down, they don't believe you. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be rescued, saved from your whole thing, and will go in and out. In and out. There's a lot of freedom and liberality there. No threat, no pressure. You can have freedom to roam and find pasture. Then he says, the thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus isn't talking about the devil. Jesus is talking about the strict, rigid pressure, the indignity of what we might call so much of organized religion, that those who keep telling other people their ideas are God's ideas, their pressures and oppressions, those are God's oppressions. And then Jesus contrasts himself with it specifically by healing a man's eyes, not as a reward, there's no test first. He did it because the guy couldn't see. And then more broadly, for the sake of everybody else, you and I. He contrasts himself with them by telling the entire faith industry, I have come to make sure people have a chance to enjoy their life, not start a new religion. The system wants to limit and tear down and disgrace and shame. I have come that they would enjoy the lives God made for them. When Jesus says life, it's not mere biological existence. It's a feminine noun, zoe. And it gets more of the idea of thriving, especially when he amplifies it with the idea of abundance. Jesus wants you and I to really thrive, to enjoy the gift of living deeply and fully. Now, I should say, if you're hearing me say that Christ really wants us to enjoy the gift of living deeply and fully, and that means Jesus is going to solve all our problems, keep us from all suffering, make us rich, please know that's garbage. I'm not saying that. Unfortunately, though, our first religions that we're born into, before we do anything or hear the name of Jesus, the first religions we're born into are Western civilization and capitalism. So that makes it so that we'll hear ideas like thriving, and we interpret them through those filters of maximized comfort and possessions and ranking higher and all that stuff. Those are the default goals until we see them and divorce ourselves from them. That's not what Jesus is saying. That's certainly not what I'm saying. The abundant life, that Zoe, the thriving, I think, that is in view here, it's about you and me actually figuring out who we are. So many of us are adults. We have no idea who we are. It's figuring out who we are under the masks and the costumes of achievement and proving our value to others and tired Christian virtues that prohibit far more than they expand. It's figuring out who we are underneath all of that, and then being born again as that person that God made and continues to ring the doorbell for, inviting us out to live and to move and to thrive and to play. Jesus said he was sent for exactly this, for us to wake up to a really great, fully lived life. But here's the thing we trip on, the thing in many of our heads right now saying, well, this can't be. We've been programmed to hear Jesus offering an abundant religious life, of being welcomed out of this religion and into this one, out of this system and then into this one. We don't go in and out. We go in and then he shuts the door and then, that's it. Welcomed into an abundant church life, an abundant doctrinally correct Christian life. So it's ultimately a perpetually dependent, self-distrusting existence again, where we're led to joyfully frame our whole lives as the mistakes. Those are our fault. We get credit for those. Success, that's all him. Or we don't really come fully alive as the human beings God made. We get to fully submit like good pets. We become something else tolerable to God. And this is because many of us believe we have a Christian duty to distrust ourselves, to even loathe ourselves, to believe that the religious authorities were right and Jesus was wrong. Frankly, thanks for Easter, Jesus, but sorry, we are wretches. We are born entirely in sins and cannot be trusted. Our own thoughts and interests and our experiences, those are invalid. Sorry, Jesus, you don't know what you're talking about. And some people call this orthodox. And I and many others are hoping to just name it for what it really is. Really cynical. It's cynical. It makes our faith's baseline negative because we start from who we are needing to be erased, not revealed. Who we are needs to be contained, not released. What's in us is bad, so we're only allowed to take credit for shame and error, while everything beautiful and good, well, that has to be imported from outside. It's terribly cynical. I mean, have you ever seen a football player fumble the ball and then point up to give God the credit for that? No. Faith, well broadcasted, it requires that we agree our humanity is nothing. It's terrible, and whatever is good about us is not us. It came from somewhere else. If this is our baseline, then really understanding ourselves, who we really are, that can't be the goal. The goal then is applying the right beliefs to ourselves. Don't understand yourself, just pave over it with the right doctrine or the right ideas. This leads to profound ignorance of ourselves and one another. Because if before I can understand a thing, you or myself, I first have to apply a Bible verse or an interpretation, a doctrine, a theology to it, then I'm not committed to knowing what's true. I'm committed to not understanding. How could we possibly live and thrive in the Zoe of Christ when we feel a duty to have predetermined conclusions about everything, like who I am, who I'm allowed to be? Now, and I understand, as does everything, there are Bible verses that people could use to argue with me here, and that's fine. Like Jeremiah 17 is a favorite that reads, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" You know, so if Jeremiah is right, gosh, we can't trust ourselves. Desperately wicked, lying hearts that we have. The Proverbs that say, you know, trust God and lean not on your own understanding. Distrust of self seems baked in, perpetualizing, I don't know if that's a word, being that we're kindergartners. We just don't have in us anything that can be trusted. So that's why affirming and celebrating ourselves feels evil for some people, Christian people. How dare you affirm what is awful, you know? That's a criticism churches like Crosspointe get all the time. Oh, their church, they're nice people. That's a feel-good church. You know, you're not supposed to feel good in the presence of Zoe. Clearly, the only way to know you're in touch with the abundant life is to feel like excrement every Sunday. Amen. So here's a tangent, or maybe a helpful little cul-de-sac. The Jeremiah passage. It reads that way, the way I just quoted it, in large part because of how the King James Bible translated it. But if you go further back in history and do the work of, it's complex, like what did these words mean back then? The more ancient translators, they didn't render this as our hearts being completely deceitful and desperately wicked. The language is actually more, the heart is deceptively mysterious and frail. Who can understand it? Frankly, if you want to be literal, it says it's our kidneys. The word is literally kidneys, not our heart. So it's not saying our hearts, our interior is bad. It's saying our innermost being is hard to comprehend. Comprehend. I just made up another word. Our innermost being is hard to comprehend. And that tracks. Have you noticed? It's hard to understand ourselves and other people. And I could do something like this to lots of the passages people recruit to make the case that we're inherently bad. But it won't help for me to do that if we feel like we have to be committed to self-doubt and to remaining in an endless, ungraduating, obedient kid posture. And I really don't mean to mock or ridicule, but some of us need to hear loudly, Christ is inviting us to grow up and move out of the house to go learn who we are, who God has made. The scandal of the gospel isn't that we're terrible, wretched sinners, scandalized by the gospel. The scandal of the gospel is for religion. Zoe transcends the formulas. It retires the formula keepers. That's the scandal of it. That Jesus looks at us and says, I want to bring you more to life, not suppress you. You want to hear what got Paul arrested over and over by the religious police? He said things like, it's for freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and don't submit again to a harness of doctrinal slavery. Or maybe put another way, stop going backwards into thinking God primarily wants obedient pets. God, our mother, our father, wants their kids to thrive, just like all good parents do. Wants them to really grow up and be who they were made to be. And this is super uncomfortable and maybe even terrifying for some of us. It's terrifying to entertain that our own lived experience could be valid. That who we really are, what we're really passionate about, what we really care about, what we really find meaning in, that could be valid to God without dressing it up in any sort of spiritual language or trying to shoehorn it into something in the church, that who we really are as a human being out there in the world, outside the worship center, that could be valid. the who we are underneath the costume of who we're supposed to be, what we're actually passionate about and built for, that could carry more weight than what strangers decided was worthy or acceptable, or one of my favorites, useful to the kingdom. It's terrifying to think that your actual life and what it is that you would love to do with it, that's your spiritual life already. It's even terrifying for some of us, not because it's our own freedom that makes us uncomfortable, it's other people's being free. That's what scares us. I hear this all the time. Gosh, if people were free to do whatever they wanted, then there would be chaos. First, they are free. They're already free. This isn't original with me, but several people have said that without God's and God's rules clamping us down, we'd be free to murder as much as we wanted. The appropriate response to that is, I'm already murdering as much as I want. It's none. People are already acting freely. So secondly, can you hear how cynical it is? How the baseline for the people that are supposed to be the most hopeful and the most loving is that people are just fundamentally terrible. The baseline is that what we human beings really want isn't an abundant life, isn't to really sprout and come to be who we were made. No, what we really want is chaos, hell on earth. I don't want that, but they do. God has not taught us that. It's religious authorities that have taught us that. The religious status quo system, however you want to frame it, it needs us to need the product. That's what has taught us that. And it's been compelling. The abundant life is a fuller, more deeply lived humanity. That's always been the goal, by the way, the invitation since the garden. A full-blown, fully alive human being. All we are as people can be built on this. Christ has come that I might have life and have it to the full. And so in all things, I want to make sure I'm contributing to our collective thriving. Who's not thriving? Can I help? How can my life touch your life and we can thrive somehow? You can build an entire worldview and life on that. So for the next couple moments, I'm going to ask a ton of questions, and they're very similar. They're almost redundant. That's on purpose. And I'm hoping for these next few moments, we can let these questions draw back some curtains, see if something, maybe something familiar comes forward. Since we'll be in this space, it'll feel like, every time I stop, this annoying, this is what's really going on inside me. This is what I really want. This is what I feel like I'm actually passionate about, and I always dismiss it. So maybe something like that will come forward. Maybe something strange and unexpected will bubble up, and you won't know what to do with it. Just pay attention to it. Don't do anything with it. Just embrace that that's in you. I fully believe there are parts of us waiting to come forward as soon as we create an environment where such a thing is welcome. So let it. And let's see what we can learn about ourselves, and then maybe dare to start taking Christ's hand today. Start walking into it. Probably won't happen all at once, but it's a path we can start. What in you wants to come to life, but you haven't felt free for some reason to let it? Who in your circles, they don't have the means, the ability, the voice, the courage to really live from their own true heart? How can you contribute in some way to their Zoe, and so to your mutual deeper living? How can you live in such a way that it's not only who you are, who you really are, but you're making it okay by doing that for others to be who they really are? Let's get just a little bit more under the hood with these questions. What would you do? Who would you be if you believed that Jesus actually came to bring you to life, to thrive, not to convert to his religion, not to contain you in an acceptable box that if you get out of, then you're unacceptable. And so there's a lot of parts of you and interests and stuff that, those don't fit in the box. If you just suspend all that and actually believe Jesus came that you could really come to life, who you really are, what you're really into, could really come to life abundantly and fully, well, who would you be? What part of you do you neglect because erasing yourself has seemed necessary for you to please God, to please your religion, your tradition, your family? You neglect this part of you. What is that? I'm a little biased about this, but it's art that I see here that gets neglected so often because we say, I can't do art because I'm not as good as a pro or as good as somebody else, even in my own family. You can't pay the bills with that. Or as soon as we're stressed, art is the first thing to go. You know, I got to get serious and responsible. And so our creative side just gets shelved. I genuinely wonder how many musicians and painters and comedians and dancers and poets and novelists and sculptors and tattoo artists and a million other expressions are there, but it's dormant because we haven't learned that all creating is a sacred spiritual act, and you're more human when you do that, when you allow whatever that is. What parts of you do you neglect and you try to ignore in order to conform to the expectations that you think God has on you, the faith has on you? The expectations maybe that somebody else created about what just genuine, responsible adulthood looks like. What would you be if you believed in the freedom Christ offers human beings? That it was real, that it was actual freedom, not freedom inside of a box, freedom to be who you are. In what ways do you wish that you were free, but you think that freedom threatens or angers or disrupts God or the God system that He, so graciously allows you to inhabit? What is that freedom that longs to be expressed? Maybe it seems like it would threaten your place somehow in your family or society, but it longs to be expressed from your innermost being, so you keep it bungee corded down. You can see the places you're not free, oftentimes, by what irritates you about other people. The people whose behavior irks or disgusts or embarrasses you, they might be making you feel that way because you envy their ability to do it. You envy their freedom. What part of you gets no attention because you've come to believe the most virtuous thing you can do about that part of you is starve it, feel guilty or selfish or unfocused for even wanting to entertain him? What is that? Who is that? In what ways do you operate on the myth that there are two worlds, a sacred and then an unsacred, a spiritual and then an unspiritual? And so you feel like what you really are, your actual interests and feelings and passions, you're going to have to spiritualize those. You're going to have to shoehorn those into a church or a responsible adult shape, or they're just going to be tossed out. Who are you if you pursued what you love, what actually matters to you, trusting that the truth of who God made you, like what you're actually interested in, that's already valid. It doesn't have to be reshaped. It doesn't have to be found useful. Or how about this? What parts of you, they're not you. Old habits, exhausting habits of pretending what is required to pretend you. Required thoughts, required ideas and conclusions. What would happen if you gently put those down? Almost like a rite of passage. Like that was for a younger version of me. I'm going to enter into a maturity, into an adulthood. I'm going to put those down and give myself the gift of honesty. What would you do if you believed you had God's permission to be who God made, who you really are, and went forward from this moment as a participant in our collective thriving, not our collective suppression, our blooming, living, abundant life? What would you become if you turned the volume down on the external authorities who demand that you be less because you are less, who demand that you be useful and compliant to the shape that they enforced, and here's the Bible verses, blah, blah, blah. If you turn the volume down on them and turned up the volume on who you actually are, there's a voice inside you that says, well, what about all the time? It gets quiet the older you get. What would happen if you turned up that volume What would happen if in the process of learning to love your neighbors and your enemies like you've been doing for a long time, you just as much learned to love you more fully the way that God loves you, and you took up more space in this world with who you actually are? I'm not saying get louder. To take up more space with who you really are, really came to life. I don't know what's coming forward for you as you consider this. It might inspire, it might be confusing, it might actually pull up a ton of resistance. Whatever it is, for many of us, there's a sense that there's gotta be something else. There's a sense of discontent or frustration about how life has been, what we've let ourselves experience and become. And so a lot of that has equated to, I guess I just need to leave and to go out, and you're welcome to. But what if it's not? What if it's the exact opposite of leaving? Maybe that sense of not so much being led away to go find ourselves. What if it's led more deeply in right here, into life, into the depths of a not yet realized abundant and free life that Christ, as it turns out, has been up to all along? What if? I can't wait to see what's next.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspointenc.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspointe.org/care. And welcome home.